Number 1.
I don't know where else to go. I'm not a Redditor. I'm not sure if this is where I should post my story. I'm just scared and looking for some kind of help. I know. Everything in No Sleep is supposedly true, even if it's not. But I promise, I'm being honest when I tell you this. It doesn't mean much coming from me, I know, but it's true. I've always been one of those people who attracts entities from the other side. Ever since I was a kid, things have seemed to be drawn to me. Spirits would pass through my room. Presences hover around me before inevitably moving on. I've had years to get used to this. I've seen a lot of shit. Dealt with ghosts and fairies, and once a demon. I didn't think anything would faze me. But then it came back. You see, nothing has ever returned. Once they leave, they're gone. They don't just 180 and go for round 2. At least they never have for me. Until now. Okay, so some backstory. I was just an ordinary kid. I had an active imagination. I played often with my stuffed animals, and I had a flair for the morbid and the magical. But I was ordinary. I didn't wave at nothing, didn't talk to myself, didn't bother my parents with imaginary friends. I had no illusions about what was real and what wasn't. Sure, I wove stories about the bathroom in my basement being haunted, but I knew that was fake. The thing in my attic was very real. I was in preschool, or maybe kindergarten, when it was most active. I was young enough at the time to merely accept its presence as how it was. But I know better now. I can look back on my hazy memories of it and feel my hair stand on end. It never hurt me. It never joined in my games. Never possessed my toys. It just watched and waited. Coiled above me. My bedroom was directly beneath the attic. Its entrance was literally in my closet. It talked to me sometimes. Used the voice of people I was familiar with, like my mother, or at the time best friend, to call my name or ask me questions. I remember for a second I would begin to answer, only to realize I was alone. Still, I was young enough to let it go fairly easily. I don't think it was confined to the attic, but it certainly spent most of its time there. Often, it prompted me to enter the attic. It would whisper in voice I knew, urge me to push open the hatch and peek inside. Sometimes I would just get a nagging feeling in the back of my head, like when you get cravings and that little voice hisses, "Feed me chocolate," and suddenly how much you want chocolate is all you can think about. It was like that, except I wanted, badly, to go into that attic. But at that age, I was too small to reach the attic's entrance, and too weak to haul a ladder upstairs. Fortunately, it didn't seem to mind. It was content to watch and wait, to curl above me as I slept, in the fog between wakefulness and sleep. I could feel it through the ceiling, its body over mine. In my mind's eye, I pictured mounds of white fluff, like feathers, all over the attic. I pictured it wreathed in white, dozing in a huge pile above my bed. If only I'd known. Eventually, while I was in elementary, it left. I don't know where it went or why, but it was gone. I forgot about it over the years. Other things came and went, and it became easy to believe that the creature of my childhood was just the same. I moved to a new house, had a demon problem there, and moved back. Spent some time in a different bedroom, had more problems there, I have recently found myself back in my old childhood bedroom. To be perfectly clear, it didn't just magically return the moment I found myself in the room I had occupied all throughout elementary and middle school. Or maybe it did, but I didn't feel it the way I feel it now. The moment I began sleeping under the attic again, things escalated slowly. It was innocuous at first, just renewed curiosity in the attic, without any trigger for the interest. Slowly, I began to feel like I was no longer alone. The air grew heavy with its weight. My skin would prickle at phantom pressure. I knew somehow I was being watched. This may sound crazy, but I wasn't really bothered. Like I said, things tend to gravitate towards me. It wasn't too unusual. I wasn't scared until I felt it above me, lying down to rest. Ever since I got my cat, a year and a half ago, he's been sleeping on the pillow next to mine. It's ritual. When I decide it's time to sleep, he inevitably makes his way to my pillow. Now he won't even touch my bed. I feel it coil above me, feel it press against the wood and plaster of my ceiling. Feel it the way I used to feel it. It urged me to the attic. It wanted, once, me to push open that hatch, to enter the crawl space, to join it in its favored place. It gets in my head and whispers, like a craving, what it wants. I think about it a lot. The thing is, I'm older now. I'm taller and stronger. I can reach the entrance to the attic, and I did. Not long ago, I dragged the ladder up to my room, and armed with a flashlight, I peered into the darkness. I wasn't dumb enough to haul myself into the crawl space, but I took a good, long look. There was white insulation everywhere, in scattered, torn up heaps. It lined the walls and piled the ground. I could barely make out anything beyond the huge mounds. It was as I had imagined all those years ago. The real kicker is, just above my head, was the largest pile. It was a glorified bed, not unlike something you'd see in a dragon's hoard, if they happened to hoard insulation. I couldn't see anything, but I knew something was there, just beneath the surface. I noped out. I don't know what to do at this point. It wants me to come back. It wants me. I don't know. It hasn't hurt me, but I can't fucking tell what its endgame is. Should I invest in a Ouija board? Should I ask one of my Satanist friends for help? Should I try a smudging? I have to do something. I'm fucked if I don't.
Number 2.
So I have this friend. Let's call him Mike. I've known Mike my whole life. He's always been there for me, and he's stuck with me through thick and thin. Growing up, Mike and I, we never really had that many friends. And because of this, we grew very close. We're teenagers now, and high school hasn't been that great for me. I still struggle with making friends, and it never helped when Mike hit puberty and became attractive. All the girls wanted him, and soon I kind of faded into the background. But he never forgot about me. He would still come over every Wednesday night for our annual pizza and horror movie night. Mike and I were watching this new horror movie that came out called Possession, which wasn't really anything new in my opinion, but it all began with the last line of the movie was spoken in some weird language. Mike looked over at me with blank eyes and he said, "It's never over." Now, at first I was like, what are you talking about? But then I realized he was translating the language that was spoken. I sort of laughed it off and asked him if it was Latin or something, but He just shook his head, still staring at me with those blank eyes. He said, "No, it's Enochian." Now I had no idea what that meant, so after Mike left, I quickly went to my computer and looked it up. What I found shocked me. It turns out that Enochian was a language originally created to speak with angels, but was later found out to have been communicating with fallen angels and demons. After that, it became a satanic language. Now I had no idea how Mike would know this language. He could barely speak Spanish. I just sort of blew it off for the night. However, I figured he just picked it up from watching so many horror movies. The next day at school, I went and asked Mike about the language. He just sort of laughed it off and said that he had his buddy learn it so that he could pass notes in class without anybody knowing what they were saying. It seemed pretty legit to me, so I let it go. Big mistake. It was the next day that everything changed. I was sitting in my room when I heard someone yell my name. I ran to my window, so sprinting straight for my house with one of Mike's friends. We can call him Dan. I ran outside to meet Dan and waited for him to catch his breath. He looked up at me, and I was filled with dread. His eyes were filled with terror. I asked him what happened, and all he could wheeze out was, "Mike." I brought Dan inside and got him a glass of water. Once he had settled down, I asked him again what Mike was doing. Was he in trouble? Dan said Mike was fine, but something had happened to him. His next words caused icy fingers to travel up my spine. Mike and I were walking in the woods when he brought up some weird language that he learned to do weird magic spells or something. I think he called it Enochian. Anyway, he told me that he could kill a frog, so I picked one up and started chanting in this weird, creepy language, and the frog started to wither and dry up, like it had been in the sun for too long, and then it died. So I went over to Mike, and when I touched him on the shoulder, he turned around, and you're not gonna believe me, but his eyes were white. Completely white, like they had rolled back in his head or something. After that, he screamed and started chasing me through the woods. He almost caught me when I was near your house. Didn't you see him behind me? Which way did he go? All I could do was sit there in shock. Mike had lied to me. Dan didn't know about Enochian, and he was never using it for more than just passing notes like he claimed. But the scariest thing about the entire situation was that I didn't see Mike behind Dan. When I ran to my window and saw Dan running down the long street, no one was chasing him. No one was there. I told Dan that he had to go and find Mike. We got into the car and started driving around. I stayed close to the forest line in hopes that Mike would come out laughing and saying that it was all just a prank. We never found him that day. After I dropped Dan off at his home, I started making my way back to my own house. I took the route near the forest again, and as I was driving, I swore that I saw something in the corner of my eye. So I slowed down the car and looked in the direction that it had come from. What I saw still haunts me to this day. Mike was there, about 100 feet from my car, but he wasn't standing normally. No, his back was bent almost in half, and his neck was cranked towards me. He was staring at me with white eyes, somehow full of venom and hatred. He was also very pale, and his clothes were ripped and ragged. I slammed my foot on the pedal and sped away, wanting to get as far away from him as possible. The rest of the way home, I could have sworn that I saw Mike sprinting after my car in my rearview mirror. But every time I looked up to check, there would be nothing. That night I was sleeping when I woke to the sound coming from my window. I turned and almost cried out. Mike was there, peering in at my house with those white, hate-filled eyes. I turned on my lamp, but when I looked back, he vanished. I ran and turned on all the lights in my room and never went back to sleep that night. I knew something was very, very wrong with my friend. My room was on the second story. The next day, I went to school as normal, and I was shocked to see Mike sitting with a group of girls. When he saw me, he looked at me with a huge cartoon grin on his face and winked. I got a sick feeling in my stomach and ran back to my car, not wanting to deal with school that day. I'm now sitting in my room, typing this out. My parents are out of town for the week, so I'm home alone. Only, I don't think I'm alone. I can hear tapping noises coming from my closet, and somehow I think I know who it is. So heed my warning, please. And never mess with satanic rituals. It will never end.
Number 3.
It has been over 20 years since these events have occurred. I did not feel I would ever tell my story until I came across this subreddit. I was reluctant to share what happened to me because I did not feel like arguing against doubt and disbelief and defending my own sanity. Here I can tell you with less of these fears. This is what took place as I best remember. In the late 1980s, as a curious teen, I became fascinated with the occult. As a child growing up in a religious household, my first exposure of occult themes came from the Bible. I always trained to understand my beliefs concerning the teachings of the church, and especially struggled with my own faith in God. After learning that demons were former angels who had rebelled against God, were cast down to earth, and could interact with humans, I came to the conclusion that the best way to prove to myself that God existed was to see if demons existed. There was no internet back then to explore my questions and sate my curiosity. Knowledge of the occult was hard to come by and had to be searched for in libraries and bookstores. In time, I collected a small library of books about witchcraft and demonology. Looking back now, I realize how foolish I was. I didn't understand what I was getting myself into. Those books have since been destroyed after what happened to me. I began reading these books and actively trying to invite demons into my life. I read, out loud, long strings of demonic names out of the books. I would cast spells and draw symbols on my walls and on the floor. Nothing happened. I had a few strange dreams, but that wasn't proof of anything. Then one day, I came across a paragraph that told me to get a full clove of garlic and stake it with a large iron nail to attract demonic power to a place. I did this and put the staked clove deep in my closet. The demons didn't come to me suddenly with a large fanfare. They came gradually, insidiously, working their way into my life and psyche without me hardly noticing until they were ready. Then they pounced, and I was almost destroyed. I woke up more frequently with nightmares. I woke up sometimes listening intently because I could have sworn that what had awoken me was laughter or whispering. I passed these off as dreams. Sometimes I woke up paralyzed for a few seconds. I passed this off as sleep paralysis. I woke up sometimes with all my sheets on the floor, far from my bed. I awoke some nights thinking, was my bed just moving? I passed this off as restless sleep. Then one night, I woke up to watch my hand and arm shoot out from my side, grab the lamp on my night table, and throw it across the room with such force that I pulled my shoulder out and the lamp practically exploded against the wall. I sat in the dark, cradling my arm, wondering how I could do such a thing out of a dead sleep. A few nights later, I did the same thing with a new lamp. with the same arm. I had to wear a sling to restrict movement of the shoulder. A few nights later, it happened one more time, but I didn't grab the lamp. I tore the sling right off my neck. I thought these things were very strange, but I still proceeded to invite the demons. I was still not convinced. I was a fool. I became irritable, and my family started to notice. I became lazy with my schoolwork, distant and withdrawn, and argumentative. My parents thought I might be on drugs, and was brought to a psychologist who tested me for them and diagnosed me with depression. I told no one what I was up to. Over time, the odd occurrences increased, but due to time and space and some embarrassment, I'll leave some out. I will tell you that late one night, I awoke to the full moon shining on my face through a window. I debated telling you this part because it sounds so strange, but I began growling at the moon. I remember not thinking as myself. My thoughts were basic and primal. I began growling more ferociously until I was practically foaming at the mouth and snapping at the moon like a rabid animal. I eventually snapped out of this and wondering what the hell I was doing. I didn't know yet, but at this point, the demons were ready to pounce. They felt they had weakened me enough and worn down the walls between worlds within my room enough to extract my soul from my body. These next recollections are the most vivid in my mind. One night, I awoke and felt very strange. I felt a jarring disjointedness, then part of myself lifted out of my feet and then worked up my body until I was floating above the bed. It felt something like if you were to smoothly pull a piece of tape off of a flat surface. I was floating above my bed and I was looking down on myself. I tried to move, but knew somehow that I would have to learn. After being amazed at what was happening, I then felt that something grabbed me by my feet, or lower part of myself, and started to violently shake me like a rag doll. I felt like a streamer being whipped back and forth. I saw one side of the room, then the other, flash before my eyes. Something was trying to tear me away from a connection I still had to my body lying on the bed. And I was terrified, and I knew that if whatever was doing this to me succeeded, I would die. But the cord tying me to my body was too strong. They could not break it. They gave up and let go, and I floated lazily up to the ceiling. I remember distinctly my cheek resting lightly against the ceiling of my room. I set my eyes on a specific imperfection on the ceiling I had studied many times from below, but it was now inches from my face. I remember thinking how it looked different from there. Suddenly, I was in the bed, looking up at the ceiling where I just was. I was taking deep breaths, like I needed air. I still felt strange, and was paralyzed with fear. I felt my chest getting heavy. I took a deep breath, but the feeling stayed. Now I felt as if I was being pushed down, but did not feel any pressure in a specific place. It was as if some invisible weight had been draped over my torso and was getting heavier. I remember thinking that this is just a dream. There's no way that any of this is happening. Then I heard a sound I will never forget, as long as I live. I heard the sound of the bed creaking. I was sinking into the bed, and the sound of the bed warping under the increasing weight was real. This was really happening. In a frenzy of fear, I burst out of the bed and ran out of the room and the house. I went to my sister's house, who lived next door, and woke her up to let me in. I was wide-eyed and hyperventilating. She eventually calmed me down and began asking questions. I did not tell her about what I had been doing and told her I saw a ghost. She laughed it off and told me to stay the night if I wanted to. I stayed. but I did not sleep again that night. By the next day, I knew what I had to do. So I went back to my house and up to my room. I quickly went into the closet, grabbed a clove of garlic with a steak nail, which was now black, and took it outside. My parents' house is made up of stone, and I found the largest open space of wall with no windows and threw the clove against the stone. I swear, the thing exploded against the wall like I had thrown a grenade. There was nothing left. I never found a piece of that clove or the nail. I threw all occult materials, objects, and books I had into the wood stove and burned them. I cleaned the symbols off the walls and furniture, and I never slept in that room again. Nothing like what I have told you ever happened to me after. I think whatever demonic and human it was had their one chance, but they failed, and they never bothered me again. So, do I now believe in God? Surprisingly, I'm still not sure that I do. But I do know that there are absolutely malicious entities in this world, and if you invite them into your life, they will gladly come in.
Yo, what's up, guys? Back here with another collab. This time with my good buddy Viidith22. This was very good narration on his part, and I highly recommend you check out his channel. The link will be in the description below, so make sure you head on over to his channel and subscribe. Thank you for watching, guys. I fucking love horses. I fucking love horses. God.